Hello and welcome to the Silk Mill and You. This is part of an ongoing series that deep dives into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. Today we're going to be looking at the settlement location that comes with the Node 2 quarry monster Spidicules. Spidicules is a pretty tough little fight, and its gear is constructed mostly around the concepts of using silk and amber to produce gear. Spidicules is one of the few minion-based bosses in the game at the moment, and probably the one that handles its minions in the best fashion. The fight is definitely very much like a boss raid kind of feel to it, with the main boss darting backwards and forwards while hordes of little minions come in and cause you a lot of problems and difficulties. It is a fantastic showdown and one of the highlights of this expansion. So, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the gear. So let's take a look, shall we? Right. Now, the Silk Mill is a little unusual compared to many of the quarry monster crafting locations in that defeating the monster doesn't automatically give you this settlement location guard. Instead, you get silk refining, the innovation. So we're going to start by talking about the innovations and the terrain card, and then we'll get on to the Silk Mill and its gear. The silk refining gives you +1 survival limit, always welcome as a passive on an innovation. Survival limit early on isn't particularly important, but the more you have later on and the more survival you can generate when departing or when arriving at a showdown, the more powerful a survival limit gets. You can't have too much, so that's great. Our first endeavour is to perform silk surgery, which we'll look at in a moment. It's a unusual and unique story event. Our second one is to convert one silk resource into one hide basic resource. This is because silk, which you can just see in the top left corner here, web silk, doesn't have the hide keyword by itself, it's just silk. Now, this is not a great ability endeavour, it's expensive. A 1-for-1 ratio, that's the kind of thing that you're normally having to do with, say, scrap into iron. Iron is a way higher tier and quality and value of resource than hide, basic hide. So this isn't really something you're going to use very often, but if you find yourself in a position where you're one hide short of a complete beacon shield or a leather armor set or something like that, it's worth remembering that you can take this costly method of getting that last piece by converting a piece of silk that you're not doing anything with otherwise. Our final endeavour is the one that unlocks the Silk Mill. It costs 2 silk, 1 bone and 1 organ. Now, you might be wondering why that's the case for this particular location. It's sort of an artefact of the Screaming Antelope design, which Spidicules is intended to replace. The stone circle used to cost resources to unlock, and it was unlocked off the organ grinder. So this mirrors that. It's just the price you have to pay to get access to the stuff. It is kind of steep, and it does push Spidicules gear back a little bit up the timeline because this is an expensive start and you may well just be looking to spend your resources on generic stuff or whatever node 1 monster you've got before you really dive into silk stuff, because of this price to access. Our other innovations are Choreia. Sorry, I come from Wales and the noise, CH, is still something I pronounce occasionally. Anyway, Choreia is a music consequence. It costs 2 endeavours to activate. You have to use a male and a female survivor as well. They have to be nominated. 70% of the time it does nothing at all. But 30% of the time it does something really significant. On the 8 to 9 result, if you depart with both those survivors, the male survivor will gain the Harvestman fighting art when departing. On a 10 plus, the female survivor devours the male, you lose the male survivor, the female gains half of the hunt XP, rounded down, one of the fighting arts, and significantly the Death Touch secret fighting art. So these two fighting arts, Harvestman and Death Touch, are really like big deals. They're big deals, and having Choreia give you a consistent way of gaining access to them is very useful. Any consistent method of getting a fighting art is something you should pay attention to, even if the odds are a little low, as they are here, because it allows you to formulate gear strategies knowing that you can have a fighting art mesh into it. So let's look at both of these fighting arts, shall we? Put them into the same stack here. First up, we have Harvestman. This gives you +3 movement, but whenever you're knocked down, you gain a -1 movement token. And if you have the Spidicules disorder, tiny ARACHNAPHOBIA, you can't use this because you're afraid to scurry around like a spider. Harvestman is really good. In Kingdom Death, movement is like the king stat, easily, because with good movement, you can always reach the monster, and you can use dash to evade the monster. So Harvestman is a fantastic tool for what is known as dash cancelling, where the monster targets you, and then you employ a dash survival action to run outside the monster's reach. So when it moves to attack, it ends up short of you, and it can't do anything at all. So that's a really powerful use for Harvestman. It's not the only use for Harvestman, though. This is very powerful when combined with monster movement, armor sets, and abilities that use your movement for getting into position, especially the Phoenix Armor's Charge. Charge has higher strength. The more that you, more movement that you have, the more movement that you take as you charge at the monster. So normally, a perfect charge gets you forward like 5 spaces from ideal positioning, and gives you a +5. Harvestman adds another 3 onto that to put it to a +8. That's big. That's very big. It's big number good. So Harvestman's fantastic. This is one of the primary ways and times when I'll actually use a male survivor on the hunt. Normally male survivors are fractionally worse than female survivors as hunters. Harvestman tips that in the other way, and it's fun to have something that synergizes with the Phoenix armor ability so neatly. Death Touch is our other fighting art. This one's a secret fighting art. You get +1 accuracy when attacking with Fist and Tooth. When you wound the monster, it gets -1 toughness until end of your attack, and you cannot use this if you're a male. That text is mostly not relevant because, as you can see from Choreia, it's females who get Death Touch, but there are methods and things like the Strange Spot promotional settlement event that can change the gender of a survivor, the sex of a survivor. So this is worth just remembering. And the typical thing to just hold in mind is you should always have your Fist and Tooth survivor be female. Whoever's training Fist and Tooth just should be female. It's good practice to have. Death Touch is the primary reason for that, but it's a lot smoother to, even if you prefer to play a mix of the sexes as survivors when you go out on hunts. I prefer to take primarily female hunt survivors because of the Manstealer hunt event. Anyway, it's good practice. It's just to make sure that you always pick the female to be a Death Toucher for stuff like this. The Fist and Tooth Fighter. Our last one is the Legless Ball. So this is I would call it, it's like an achievement innovation. So when you're fighting Spidicules, there are 8 hit locations that represent each of her legs. If you remove all of them within a single showdown fight, when you defeat Spidicules, you, instead of completely killing the monster, you roll the Legless Ball all the way back to the settlement, and it becomes an innovation in your settlement. It gives you +2 insanity when departing, and once per showdown, once per settlement phase, you can get a web silk from the Legless Ball. You also have this 10+ insanity option to get rid of the Legless Ball and get the Grinning Visage rare gear. We will look at both of the Spidicules rare gear cards in this video, but you lose the Legless Ball. I'm going to say now, you typically don't do this unless you're super confident that you'll get yourself another Legless Ball quickly, because on top of this, the Legless Ball is a requirement for 3 unique pieces of gear from the Silk Mill. So maybe if you've crafted all 3, you might cut the face off a Spidiculus and use it as a shield, but as we will see, the Grinning Visage just isn't strong enough for the portion of the game where you'll likely have the Legless Ball. So I wouldn't really do this most of the time. You can try it yourself, but I think the shield just isn't good enough for the price you pay. Alright, so quick note on resources before we get into it. Web Silk is your big primary one. Not only Web Silk's mostly gained through things like Egg Sacs. There'll be a number of these when you fight Spidiculus equal to double the monster level. They always give you the Web Silk. They always deploy a Spiderling, which is the minions that Spidiculus does. If you find them when encountering a different quarry monster, the Spiderling will still spawn, but it's a lot less threatening than when they spawn during the Spidiculus fight, as Spidiculus buffs her little Spiderlings a great deal throughout the entire fight. Normally with the Egg Sacs, it's worth popping them early and making sure that somebody else is available to either kill the Spiderling as quickly as possible or get you back on your feet if you happen to get knocked down. Because of course some monsters take advantage when you're knocked down. Right, that's Web Silk. It's our primary resource. Then we have all of these. Now Spidiculus is very prone to having a lot of sit one-offs. So there's a great deal of unique resources within her resource deck. That can make getting things quite a challenge. So you typically want to sort of remember and plan ahead as to what you want to build so you can put things to one side. In particular, if you're looking to make these 3 here, the 3 rings, you really need to be planning because they require multiples of cards that you can only get 1 of in the resource deck. So they could require 5, like if you're fortunate, 5 fights to get everything you need, and you have to be really fortunate. Typically they'll take more than that. And they also require the Legless Ball. But we will look at them and they are worth the squeeze. Like, they are very good. So let's get on to the gear, shall we? And we'll start with the armor set and then we'll work through all of this in the order it appears on the settlement location. Okay, so to begin with, we have the Silk Turban, which is the hat. This requires a silken nervous system, which is this strange resource here, and more on that in a moment. 3 silk and 1 hide. Hive? We don't have bees yet, they're coming. It's 1 hide. So the silken nervous system only comes from the level 3 Spidiculus, which means that you cannot complete the silk armor set until after you've gotten strong enough to be able to tackle a node 1 or node 2 monster at level 3. And let me just say, the level 3 Spidiculus is no joke. You most certainly are going to need dash and surge to be able to deal with it, because it is a constant threat with all of the Spiderlings that it will keep pouring out. And that is a genuine danger, because Spiderlings are kind of dangerous even just without mass numbers, but when they really get a lot of numbers on the board, it can get to be a massive issue. This is actually one of the issues with Spidiculus, is the Silk Turban is good. It's very good, but it's not so good that it needs to be locked behind the level 3 version. So this kind of holds silk armor back a lot. However, what we've got here, if we just ignore that and we get into the gear itself, is it has the keywords that all of these pieces have of armor, set, silk and flammable. Flammable and silk both are keywords with additional properties. Silk has some positive applications for a particular type of survivor, and flammable has some negative connotations versus the Sunstalker, which will destroy flammable things, and sometimes the hunt relates to them a bit as well. Next up, next up is the ability, I should say. So we have over here these two affinities, left blue, right green, and then they require puzzle things. This is a common element of all of the Spidicules ability for the Silk Armor abilities, I should say. They always require puzzle affinities to be connected. That can make sorting out a good layout quite challenging. This ability you get here is totally unique. You get to use your activation to turn the monster to face away from you, and you can only use it during the survivor's turn. So this is a direct manipulation of the monster's positioning, which is quite rare. It can help the survivors if something's gone horribly wrong and the monster is pointed at a survivor who really cannot afford to be the nearest threat in facing, for example. So this manipulation can be super useful. It does have applications in all sorts of other different kind of things, like helping set up for blind spot attacks and similar. Or it's one of those things where once you start looking at where you can use it, its abilities really impress. It also has a decent amount of hit points, armor points with 3. All of these silk pieces have that. Okay, next up we have the silk wraps. This is just a very simple basic arm piece. It's one of the only ones without an ability, but it provides 2 affinities, a left facing green, which as you can just see here would help with the silk turban, and a down facing red, which can help with the silk robes, which are coming up next. Okay, then we have the silk robes and silk sash. These two are effectively the same piece of gear but with different affinities and a different location. They both give you +1 survival when departing. Fantastic. That is a passive ability that you'll always get. The silk robes, if you connect both reds and the blue, you can have this activation ability once a showdown, increasing your total armor points by 5, adding 1 to each hit location. And that means a lot, because as we'll look at a moment with the Spidicules Silk Armor set bonus, having lots of armor points can be really beneficial due to the way that you can take advantage of that. The silk sash, same thing, but requires 2 greens, making it a little bit easier to activate overall. And this is a decent ability. It's kind of one of those ones you'll pop when you're out of position, or you've just got a turn where attacking isn't really something you want to be doing. So it's a decent sort of tanky-ish option, raising the silk armor all the way up to 6 to all locations effectively. If you have both of these active in the same gear grid, it is possible to have both active in the same gear grid. Our last piece of silk armor before we look at the set and the layout is the silk boots. These are low-key some of the best boots in the entire game. They have these 2 green affinities. When those are connected, you get +1 movement, or more movement's always nice, and once per round you can spend 1 survival to gain 2 insanity. If you have any way of continuously generating survival, like the God Mask or the Manhunter's Death Pact, or any other way, you've got a steady stream of insanity coming in here, which you can use, for example, to help activate a sentient weapon. But this is also used in mixed sets. Now, mixed sets is where you just mix and match, however you want to call it, different pieces from different armor sets and put them together for abilities. The silk boots combined with the Phoenix Placard, which allows you to spend insanity to prevent hits, work really well together. It even has the right facing green affinity to connect to the Phoenix Placard. So you will find quite powerful mixed set builds that are employing silk boots along with Phoenix bits and everything. This has become even more viable with the Gambler's Chest because it's brought us the Clothed and Satiated set bonus, which is a really significant and important piece of making mixed sets work. Okay, so that's all of our silk armor pieces. In essence, it's a leather tier armor set with a lot of affinities, a lot of interesting and unique abilities on it. It helps give you survival. It can effectively be the equivalent of 6 armor points in all locations, and It kind of needs to be in order to hang in the portion of the game where you would craft this. It is a fairly good armor set, and the only negative is this silk and nervous system requirement for the turban, which I think is not really necessary for the power level that this armor set offers. Now, here's our armor set bonus. So this gives us 1 armor points to all hit locations. Classics, completed set bonus there. When you are attacked, after hit locations are rolled, you may change 1 hit location die to the result of your choice. This is low-key super strong. One of the biggest downfalls of a survivor can be when variance gets you and you're sat there with, say, no armor points left on your body, or even worse, your head, and the monster has a headhunter attack, or it just rolls the head on one of its hit location dice. This lets you spread the damage around to whichever location is least damaged at a time, and that is very strong. You should be employing this pretty much every time you're attacked to spread out the damage and ensure that you have protection for a longer period. So it's really hard to demonstrate how good this is until you start playing with it. So it's a very impressive set bonus in a quiet and understated fashion. Now, the other negative of Silk Armor is this layout. So there's essentially 2 main layouts that you'll see Silk Armor go in. This is the Z formation, or the S if you prefer. It activates everything apart from the boots. So this allows you to have the Silk Turban active. It gives you the equivalent of the 6 armor points to all locations once you've spent the activations. It's a solid layout, but obviously you are compromising on not getting the incredible Silk Boots ability, so you need to figure that into your particular build. On the other hand, if you're more interested in activating the Silk Boots, whoops, misclicked, you're more likely to lay things out a little bit more like this, which with some affinities here and here will let you have all of these active. You just don't get to activate the silk robes. It's frustrating for definite, but it's also quite interesting the way this is designed as a modular armor set. So I don't think it's bad that you have this kind of stuff going on. There is still plenty, there's a lot of power in just having this layout here with an up-facing red there. It works fine. There's no way to do both, which it is what it is. You could also have a layout where you have both sets of robes sort of active, and you play around with it a lot, but ultimately this is the default layout you will look at. Right, so as we've just stepped outside, before we go on to the items and the weapons, let's take a brief look at the other thing that benefits from Silk, and that is the Silk Surgeon. Here we are at the Silk Surgeon card. This is an unusual secret fighting art. Before we get into the details, how do you get a Silk Surgeon? Well, there is a single legendary AI card that will create what's a stalk puppet, which is where the Spidicules jams its front lure spike into the top of the head of a survivor and removes them from the rest of the showdown. But if that Spidiculus is then slain, the survivor has a chance of coming back as a Silk Surgeon. I'll explore this more when I talk about the Spidiculus showdown itself. But the Silk Surgeon fighting art is really unusual in that it has ranks, and it will rank up based on performing Silk Surgery. We'll look at that in a moment, and you can see that when you're a Silk Surgeon, you get this nice ability to just patch up somebody's armor a bit. If you have silk and amber, all armor silk, all amber jewelry, you'll get extra evasion, and then you have a 40% chance of reviving survivors who would die when you're at rank 3. This is very powerful. It's a challenge to achieve because the level 3 Spidiculus really is a incredibly aggressive monster, obscenely aggressive, and losing a survivor for the whole showdown can be a serious problem. You sort of want it to happen near the end of a showdown, but it's very, very difficult to manipulate. It requires a lot of patience if you're trying to force it to happen, and spiderlings do not they don't give you a lot of time and space at all in the level 3 fight. Silk Surgery it's from the Silk Refining Innovation, and if you don't have a Silk Surgeon, you'll have to roll on this table here. On the table, most of these results are not super great. First thing to note is that ensure you only have one piece of silk in storage, because if you roll 3 to 4, you will archive every single silk resource in the settlement, which is not great. Archiving one is fine. It does amusingly have a survivor who's just mummified in a gigantic pile of silk. There are strategies you could employ, especially if you're about to go into the final showdown and you want the survivor to have a ton of armor points. This could be of benefit, but you ideally don't want to do that because it's temporary, and it's temporary at the cost of resources. Instead, the big exciting thing is if you have one silk and you roll 7, 8 or 9, you can remove a permanent injury from the survivor. This fixes any kind of permanent injury. Replace a leg, replace an arm, put a new eyeball in. Who knows how it works, but it does work. Then on a 10, you get to do this radical procedure where you roll a hit location dice. The nominated survivor gets a random disorder, and then the given location will apply a certain thing. The Silk Surgeons, on the other hand, they get to do radical procedure. They collect a finger from the survivor, which has no mechanical impact, but maybe you want to note it on the survivor's sheet. And they increase their Silk Surgeon level. When they do a radical procedure, they get to roll dice equal to their surgeon level, so they could roll 3 dice, making them significantly better at this. To walk through each of the results, head is +1 permanent accuracy and removes all permanent head injuries other than blind. You'll notice that's different to this, which will fix blind. This won't. And the survivor loses all understanding. You won't be able to repeat milestones if you do lose all understanding, so that's a big negative. On the body, which remember is twice as likely to happen as any other location, you do a heart implant. They gain +4 permanent strength and -4 permanent luck. That's a reasonable trade-off. If you're not leveraging luck, having no luck is usually fine, but be aware of monsters with parry hit locations. You will have trouble with that. You set your hunt XP to 14, and not great most of the time, but if you're looking to create a murder bait, which is a survivor who has masses of hunt XP to protect more important survivors who have less, this is a way of getting that, albeit a random one. On the arms, if you have the dismembered arm severe injury, you give it to another survivor, you get +1 permanent speed. This is great. This is one of the main results because, for example, if your spear-wielding survivor loses an arm, most spears are two-handed, and that means you can't do your job anymore. But if you get an arm transplanted onto you from another survivor, that problem goes away, and spears actually really love more speed because they care less about the trap than anything else, like any other type of weapon. So this is a nice result, and this is a way of getting a dismembered arm back. If you have any permanent waist injuries, you remove all the suffer 1 population. Otherwise, you can re-roll the dice if you don't have any waist injuries. I like that there's a re-roll on this, so and the same here on the arm. It's nice to have that option of fixing things if you don't have another go at trying to fix what you're looking for if you don't have the relevant injury. And then our last one is you get new legs. You exchange all permanent leg injuries with a survivor of your choice. So typically you will have disposable survivors. Those are survivors who are basically at the point that you don't care what happens to them. They just kind of exist in the settlement, but they're not of any value. They become a source of repairs for your valuable survivors. But as you can see, Silk Surgery is a little random. and this is a more mid-late kind of ability because of how much effort you have to put in to get a Silk Surgeon. Similar with the Legless Ball situation, it is a challenge. Right, let's get back to the gear now, shall we? Okay, so our first weapon is the Amber Poleaxe. This is a melee weapon with the axe and spear keywords. It is two-handed and it has the Amber keyword, which has a small positives to the Amber keyword. It has reach 2 and it has this unique ability. When the monster collides with you, roll 1d10 on a 6+, the monster suffers 1 wound. It also has a down-facing green, and it has a 2, 6+, 3 stat profile. This is exactly the same stat profile as the King Spear. So this weapon costs 2 bone and organ and a venom sac to construct. And that's very expensive, especially when you consider that the King Spear is statistically the same, but costs way less. Or the Greater Gax is statistically better and costs less. So you're not really making the Amber Poleaxe in a campaign where you have either the White Lion or the Gorm, but if you don't have access to a early game axe or spear, this can be a good place to start. Now there's also another strategy that you can employ, which is nicknamed Punji Sticking. That's after the traps that were used in Vietnam by the Vietnamese, particularly unpleasant, like pits with sharpened spikes. The whole trick is that against monsters who target via threat, like the Butcher, the White Lion, the Kingsman, you can use fecal salves to make your survivors basically untargetable, and then you can stand them in front of the monster and have further away, in a direct line, a threatening survivor. And the monster will push through your Amber Poleaxe, collide with you, and you will take collision, which normally knocks you over, pushes you away, or you may have ways of negating that portion, and then 50% of the time they suffer an automatic wound. As I've talked about before in other videos, automatic wounds are unicorns. This is a way of doing them. You can actually, with 2 survivors with Amber Poleaxes and then 2 other survivors who will act as bait, by drawing the monster's attention and then removing themselves from the monster's attention by using a fecal salve. You have to attack to remove the fecal salve ability after you've applied it, so you'll typically want a ranged weapon or something to help do that. You can make the monster run back and forth between 2 survivors, constantly running over the other 2 survivors. It's messy. It's not really something you're super looking to do, but it is an interesting fact that you can play that way if you want to against certain monster types. Amber Poleaxe obviously gets better against monsters who like to collide with you. There are some of those that do that. Notably, the new Node 1 monster, the Crimson Crocodile, loves colliding with survivors, so the Amber Poleaxe becomes more valuable there. It also helps that the Crimson Crocodile doesn't have an early game spear, so you have a spear you can get with Spidicules. I actually think Spidicules has some really good synergies with so many different monsters. It has terrible synergies with the White Lion. The only real synergy between them is that the White Lion gives you the Katar circlet, and Spidicules has a hit location that you're looking to specifically scout out and destroy. So it's interesting. Spidicules has definitely gained a lot more in value since the 1.6 updates, which unpaired so many core gear cards away from the Screaming Antelope, because Spidicules replaces a Screaming Antelope. So yeah, it's become a lot more of a usable and interesting expansion monster as things have updated further, but I do hope the gear gets a bit of a look over in Campaigns of Death, because there's some areas that could just be tweaked. Spidicules is one of those expansions that's like a hair's breadth away from being one of the best, and it's really mostly the gear where those tweaks are required. Right, our next one is the throwing knife. This is 4 speed, 9+ accuracy with 2 strength. It costs 1 silk, 1 serrated fangs. It has range 4 and a right facing red affinity. At the end of your attack, you get a +1 accuracy token for each permanent perfect hit. When knocked down, you remove all of your +1 accuracy tokens. In concept, the idea with a throwing knife is as you throw these, you become more and more accurate. Because you roll a lot of dice and try and get perfect hits. In practice, this is just something you leave in the box. It's a thrown weapon, so who cares? If there's no weapon proficiency, it needs to be really good for you to use it. No weapon proficiency here. Why are you going to throw some throwing knives for the purposes of boosting your accuracy to use, say, a bow, when you could just get bow specialization instead? I've tried to find out what the point to this weapon is. As somebody who I've mentioned before, throwing knives is part of the martial weapons that I trained with when I was younger. I'm thoroughly disappointed in these, the same way I'm disappointed in all thrown weapons. So all I have to say is just don't bother with this weapon. There's currently no reason to use these, because if you do hit, you've got a terrible strength total to have to roll against the monster with, which is not what you want. You don't want a high speed, low strength weapon when you can have a medium speed, high strength weapon. Well, anyway, our next candidate is the Silk Whip, which costs a large appendage and a bone. It's a melee whip silk. It has 2 speed, 6+ accuracy, 3+ strength. Pretty standard. It has this ability: if you activate its right facing blue and down facing green by connecting them up, you will get on a perfect hit, you may archive a mood in play instead of drawing a hit location. Really powerful ability. The Silk Whip is kind of a side grade from the Hunter's Whip, but I prefer the Silk Whip. I think this is the best early game whip in the game, because this ability here is incredible. Just archiving moods off a monster is really, really strong. There are very few monsters that can get access to their moods once they're archived. And I would take the Silk Whip over the Hunter's Whip. Of course, the main difficulty with whips is you don't kind of have very far to progress until you get the blacksmith after the Silk Whip. So you want a big, beefy, powerful survivor with high strength using this. And it is still very, very effective. And a good weapon. It just needs a better progression line following it. Then we have the Hooded Scrap Katar. It costs 1 small appendage and 1 scrap. It's a 2, 7+4 Katar. It has the Katar and metal keywords on top of being a weapon and melee. It has a left facing blue, which is fine affinity, and it has a very unique paired ability. If you hit 4 or more times in a single attack with this weapon, the monster suffers 1 wound before hit locations are drawn. So to get to 4 speed, you would run this paired. This is actually a paired weapon that I would recommend running paired. It has a good stat line for the time which you'll be able to construct this weapon. 4 strength is kind of the minimum strength I would consider a node 2 weapon. And this is a better weapon than the Lion Beast Katar. It has different applications because this is just a straight damaging the monster type weapon rather than a luck based farming weapon. Although with the blue affinity it can still do a little bit of luck farming if you wanted to go that way. This ability here, it's another automatic wound and you don't have to deal with a hit location. That's fantastic. Silk Whip, same reason Silk Whip's really good, is just like, boom, deal a wound. Although archiving a mood isn't exactly dealing a wound, but as many monsters will discard their moods, is kind of equivalent. This is just solid though. To stay on topic about the Katar, this is a really good Katar, and it's one of the primary reasons you will craft weapons from the Silk Mill. Then we have the Amber Edge. So this costs 1 bone, 1 organ and 1 chitin. It is a amber scimitar keyworded weapon. It has slow. It's got a 1, 6+4 strength attack line. And at the end of each attack, if you wounded the monster, you get to make an additional attack with this weapon. This weapon is really good. Scimitar doesn't yet have a proficiency attached to it, and there are only 2 scimitars in the game. The other one is in a beta content. Bardar, who is a silk armored wearing survivor, has the Tox scimitar, if I remember the name correctly. But anyway, to get back to it, the Amber Edge might not have any keywords, but this is just a really good weapon. This is the kind of thing I will give to my shield or fist and tooth training survivor. So after they've achieved their requisite tick for their weapon proficiency, they can switch to using the Amber Edge for the rest of the fight. Slow with this ability here is not slow. This is the equivalent of having additional speed, admittedly a random amount of additional speed, but it's better than speed because each one is a separate attack. So you effectively get to go one at a time against hit locations, bang, 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 and really only reactions and the trap can stop you as long as you keep rolling to hit. So this weapon impresses, and it's fantastic for the early game, and the stats high enough to even continue being used in the mid game for a certain amount of time. Okay, next up we have the Silk Bodysuit. This costs 5 silk, 2 hide, and 1 spinnerets. Spinneret being a single one-of in Spidicules' deck. You can just see it on the edge of the screen there. Okay, when you get spinnerets, save it for this. The Silk Bodysuit is one of the best item cards in the game. So it is silk and flammable. It is unique, so you can only have 1 in your settlement. It reduces the damage from every hit suffered by 2 to a minimum of 1, but you may not have any heavy or metal armor in your gear grid. So damage reduction like this is usually capped at reducing by 1. This is reducing by 2, which is negating most level 3 monsters' damage tokens. Most level 3 monsters get +2 damage tokens. This is just ignoring that entirely. It'll work with silk armor, of course, but it'll also work with leather armor and any kind of armor set that comes out that doesn't have heavy or metal keywords. And you can still have a heavy or metal shield, but it's just armor keywords that you can't have in your gear grid. This is an incredibly powerful item, and you should be trying to craft this as early as possible. And it's only gotten stronger with the Gambler's Chest coming out because the Colosseum has the Singing armor set, which is a premium tanking armor set because there's a hat that ignores 1 hit if you've taken at least more than 1 hit. The Singing Pantaloons, the Singing armor, Singing Pantaloons is one of the pieces of gear, it's the one I'm actually looking at. The Singing armor set has the flesh keyword. It's not heavy, it's not metal. It can have a silk bodysuit on there, and oh boy does it go hard when you have that set up correctly. You just have a survivor who waltzes into the jaws of death and comes out with minimal injuries. It's also just really good with silk armor. This will take silk armor going a long distance because silk armor gets to even adjust the damage, the hit locations a little bit, so all of its armor points last even longer. I think it is absolutely insane that this is not locked behind a higher level Spidiculus or some kind of challenge. You just need to get the spinnerets, and as soon as you get the spinnerets, make one of these. Just do it. It is so good. In fact, in the community, this is considered to be such a good piece of gear that often the silken nervous system resource requirement is taken away from the silk turban and house ruled onto the silk bodysuit instead. And it still remains absolutely fairly priced, and actually fixes a lot of the problems that many players have with Spidiculus, with silk armor. So that is a house rule you could consider if you find yourself leaning too heavily into the silk bodysuit and instead want to experience the silk armor from the silk mill a bit more, a bit earlier, around the time that it actually gets to properly shine. So maybe we'll see changes like that in Campaigns of Death. I certainly hope so. Until then, however, I'm not in the place here to tell you how to play your game. I'm just here to talk about good how good things are, how bad they are, and the silk bodysuit's one of the best items in the entire game, without breaking the game in a fundamental fashion. Next up we have the Silk Bomb. This costs 2 resources and 2 silk. It's an item thrown, silk, amber and fragile. You can activate it, and until the end of the round all survivors ignore knockback and bash, and you archive after use. Currently there is almost no space where the Silk Bomb would be used for anything, and the fact that you archive it for such a marginal ability is really unfortunate. This might have some applications when the Black Knight Nemesis expansion reaches people. We don't know yet, but as it stands right now, because this self-archives and has no affinities and just does one thing in the showdown that is kind of marginal, I would not recommend bothering with this. There are much better ways to get around knockback and bash. Like the Musk Bomb, the Silk Bomb is also really just kind of a waste of a card, unfortunately. Okay, so before we get on to the prestigious rings, we're going to talk about the 2 rare gear cards. They are the Weaver and the Grinning Visage. We're going to pop out of this deck for a moment because we'll look at just briefly. This is where you can get the Weaver. During this Picked Clean Spidicules Hunt event, the event revealer on a 9+ will find the Weaver. Otherwise they might get bleeding token or suffer event damage to hit locations. You'll decide as we talk about this whether you think it's worth trying to get the Weaver for this 80% chance of just bad stuff happening, but none of these bad results are too bad overall. You know, they're not massively negative. Oh, I am too zoomed in for that. There we go. Right, let's get back to the Weaver then. So the Weaver is a weapon, melee, sword and amber with an up facing and left facing red. It's got 3 speed, 6+ accuracy and 2 strength. It's unique. When you wound the monster, you add a armor point to a random hit location. This is actually a very strong ability. Adds a great deal to your survivor's durability. The only negatives with the Weaver are this terrible strength. If you've got a lot of strength, ways of boosting your strength up a great deal, then the Weaver can just go the distance, because everything else about this weapon is fantastic. So that's the only negative I have to say. Beyond the fact that this is a little bit of like in bookkeeping, I would recommend maybe using tokens to represent your armor levels. There's a fantastic set of shield designed armor tokens on Board Game Geek that you can use as little stacks for your armor tokens. But otherwise, just get used to the fact that you're going to be bookkeeping your armor a lot, and if you're happy with that, the Weaver is really solid. Even if you're not looking to wield it with a big old Conan the Barbarian beefcake, it still does the work in the early game quite nicely. The Grinning Visage comes from Legless Ball, as we talked about previously. You slice the ball's face off and turn it into a shield. Weapon, melee, shield, 2 speed, 7+ accuracy, 4 strength. It's unique. It's got block 1. Now, when you wound with the shield, you can spend a survival to add 1 to all your hit locations, limit once per attack. As I mentioned with the Legless Ball, this stat line isn't quite good enough for justifying losing the ball. To be brutally honest, this would need to have about 10+, maybe 12 strength for me to consider sacrificing a Legless Ball to make it, because of the requirement of a Legless Ball for the rings. Maybe if you had all 3 rings, you might then turn the ball into a Visage. Also, if you're really good at delegging the ball, coring the ball, you might be willing to get this, but I just don't think this block number or this stat line is good enough. But the ability is very powerful if you have a sufficiently high level of base strength on a survivor. So it's not useless, it just could have been better focused to justify the cost of losing a really good innovation. Okay, last of all, we have the 3 rings. So there's 1 ring for each of these, and those of you who are in the know will be already aware why this is sitting over here. For everyone else, prepared for a ride, because this is a fun one. So each of the rings is effectively the same ring at its core, but it has a flavour to it that makes it different from the others. So they all have the item, jewellery and amber keywords, and they give you 2 armour points to the arm location. They are unique, and they have the accessory ability, which means you can wear them and wear armour on the arms. And then they have 3 affinities pointing in different directions. So the red ring has up, left and down, the blue ring has left, right and down, and the green ring has up, right and down. If you connect all of these, you get access to a special ability. For the red ring, this is whenever you gain a bleeding token while the monster controller, the monster suffers a wound. You can do this maximum of twice per round. The blue ring, if you're the monster controller, when the monster draws an AI card, you draw an extra card, you select one to play and discard the other. It's a turbocharged rawhide headband, which I'm sure you can already think of how good it is to have a rawhide headband automatically activating, but it's just passive and slightly better. And then we have the green ring, which the first time you're attacked each round, you gained 3 armor points to all hit locations if you are the monster controller. Now, you're only going to be the monster controller 1 in every 4 turns, because that's how the monster controller works. Even if the other survivors are dead or off the board for whatever reason, they still have a turn being the monster controller. Additionally, if you're playing solo, as per the official rules, you cannot have the monster controller token, so these rings don't do anything there. Many players just kind of house rule to have it, even if they don't get the insanity benefit of self-targeting, just so they can actually use these rings. So, the crafting cost on all of these rings requires the Legless Ball, but they also need 5 resources in a 3 and 2 split. So the red ring needs 3 Venom Sac and 2 Arachnid Hearts, the blue ring needs 3 eyeballs and 2 stomachs, and the green ring needs 3 unlaid eggs and 2 spinnerets. So as I mentioned, near the top end of this video, I think, that's a lot of work. That is a minimum, if you are absolutely 100% fortunate with your drops, a minimum of 3 showdowns per ring, and more likely it's going to be 5 or 6 or 7, and you need that Legless Ball. So they need to be good. The truth is, all 3 of these rings are really good. So we're going to start by talking about the blue and green rings, both of which are the kind of rings you put on a tank. Now, the green ring is really easy to identify. In essence, even if you're just getting 3 armor points to all hit locations once every 4 turns, that's 12 armor points per 4 turns. Sorry, not 12 armor points, 15 armor points per every 4 turns rounds in the game, which is so many armor points. And the blue ring kind of prevents even more than that. It's less obvious, but the more powerful the monster's AI actions are, its cards, the more powerful the blue ring is. And sometimes monsters do things that don't give a hoot about armor points. A classic example is the Lion God's Earthquake card, which just automatically kills. The green ring's not going to protect against that, but the blue ring's going to slam it off into the discard pile and give it a little one-fingered salute as it departs. So they're both really, really good. But where they get amazing is when you have access to the Gloomhammer from the Slenderman. So the Gloomhammer, which I will talk about mostly in the Slenderman video, has an ability that when you wound, you end your attack, cancelling any reactions, you gain the monster controller tile, and you full move the monster directly away from you. What that means is at the start of the next round, you will pass the monster controller tile to the survivor to the left of the Gloomhammer wielder. If that survivor is the one wearing a given ring, you've now got a reliable way of every single round having the survivor with the ring be the monster controller, only failing when Gloomhammer fails to connect the wound, which is quite, it's less likely than you'd think, because Gloomhammer has 2 speed, 7 plus accuracy and 13 strength, but it's also a club, so it will synergize with Lantern Armor. So this is a common classic synergy between Spidicules and Slenderman, and it is really, really powerful, almost to the point that it breaks the game. It doesn't quite, because obviously monsters can get around armor points, and you still have to resolve an AI card, and sometimes the Gloomhammer just misses, or you roll a 1 and it fails to wound. But it is so unique and so very, very powerful that I had to mention it. Now, I've not talked about the red ring in the same way yet here, so there's a reason for that. Let's get back to the red ring before we finish. So the red ring has this ability: if you gain a bleeding token while the monster controller, the monster suffers 1 wound, a maximum of twice per round. So you have to be able to bleed yourself to take advantage of this. And there are ways of reliably bleeding yourself. So it turns out, if you combine the red ring with a secret fighting art from Slenderman, which lets you turn into a completely untargetable character with the Gloom Man status, you can kill every single monster in the entire game without them ever being able to target you or be able to draw its trap or do anything like that. It's known as the Red Ring of Death build, after what used to happen to, I think it was all Xbox 360s, would get the Red Ring of Death. It's game-breakingly distorting. It's not the kind of thing that is very engaging to do. You kind of do it once to see if you can do it, and then you're like, oh, okay, right. So I win, yeah? And unless the monster has a way of killing you through insanity, like the Slender Man or the Screaming Antelope end of game, end of showdown auto kill for being too insane. It's just there's just no getting around this. I'm really hopeful this ring gets changed to something else when we get to Campaigns of Death, because it's either completely and utterly irrelevant, or in combination with Story of the Young Hero, an ability in the game that you can get from the Storytelling Innovation, if I remember correctly. I'm going to double check that right now to make sure I am remembering correctly. Yes, I am remembering correctly. The Story of the Young Hero is at the start of your act. You may recall the heroic sacrifice from the story and bite your wrist. Gain 2 bleeding tokens and +1 survival. So literally all you need to do then is have a bandage to patch up your bleeding. And as the monster can't target you due to how Gloom Man works, we will look at that in the Slender Man episode, which is coming pretty soon after this one. Then you can just kill the monsters. So I don't recommend making the red ring, if I'm honest, because either it just kind of does nothing if you're trying to be fair with it, and if you're trying to be unfair with it, the game can't handle that. The game systems fall apart and the monsters just kind of end up struggling or just utterly helpless. It's not as much fun as playing the Last Man Standing builds, where you have a single survivor who's all hopped up and amazing and everyone else just kind of dies or runs away. This is very different to that. This is distorting the game. So I don't recommend you craft the red ring, because it's hard to not end up abusing it if you're going to try and do anything good with it at all. But anyway, that is the Silk Mill, and now we're just going to quickly wrap everything up, because this video is about to tick over being an hour long, and I'm still recovering from the flu. So, in summary, the Silk Mill is a very good crafting location. It costs a little bit to unlock, but it is worth it. Silk armor, while being inexplicably locked behind the level 3 Spidiculus is still a unique, interesting, and potentially quite powerful armor set. Of the weapons, the Amber Poleaxe has some interesting applications against monsters that like to collide. It is a spear and an axe, but it gets more valuable when you are not playing with the White Lion or the Gorm as your Node 1 monster, so there is definitely a nice space for it in the Crimson Crocodile Spidiculus combined together timeline campaigns. The Silk Whip is my favourite early game whip, just lacking a little bit on the strength, but it makes up for that with a very powerful activated ability. The Hooded Scrap Katar is a premium paired weapon that uses paired in a correct fashion and is definitely worth exploring if it interests you. The Amber Edge is a fantastic weapon for shield and fist and tooth based survivors. The bodysuit is one of the best items in the entire game, and just as soon as you get a set of spinnerets, it should be your first priority to try and craft. The Silk Bomb is a waste of cardboard, and of the 3 rings, when you're playing fair, the blue and the green ring are very powerful. When you're playing unfair, they're kind of broken, and the red ring is incredibly busted when being unfair with it. Otherwise, I do think this Silk Mill is a interesting and engaging location. I would like to see the strengths on some of these weapons upgraded a bit to match that this is a Node 2 settlement location. The strengths are a little low on many of the weapons, like the Silk Whip and the Amber Poleaxe. I think even the Amber Edge could have a slightly higher strength, as it has no particular weapon proficiency. Anyway, that is the Silk Mill. That is a little bit about Silk Surgeons and all of the innovations and the fighting arts. Well, most of the fighting arts. So we are done. And when you're out there in the darkness and you hear the voice of a long lost friend, don't fall to Spidiculus's trap, and draw your weapon and be prepared for a fight. Otherwise, happy hunting.